In any case, they need not have been pretending to assert, and the reader need not understand them to have been doing so in order to understand and appreciate their works as works of fiction. Constructing a painted or sculpted work of fiction is not thereby pretending to make truth claims. It is not pretending at all. Compare the manufacturing of dolls. That surely is not an act of pretense, and I see no reason to regard painting or sculpting differently. To paint or sculpt or manufacture dolls is rather to produce props for others to use in their imaginative activities. If doubts remain, consider the possibility of a society which has no tradition at all of using pictures or sculptures as vehicles of assertion, or as vehicles of any other illusionary acts. Artists in this society create pictures and sculptures of animals and people, of bathers and guitar players, but never as a means of informing anyone else of the existence of or nature of actual animals or people, nor as a means of communicating any other information to them. They regard the act of drawing a bison, for example, always as making a new fictional bison, never as explaining to anyone something about an actual animal. Such a drawing surely qualifies as a work of fiction, but the artist, just as surely, was not pretending to assert anything in creating it. He was not mimicking a tradition of making truth claims with paint, for there is no such tradition to mimic. The possibility of a society like this one seals the fate of the pretended assertion theory of fiction. Nothing is a work of fiction by virtue of being a pretended vehicle of assertion, not even works that happen to have this additional role. This goes for literary works as well as paintings and sculptures. The fiction writer need not be pretending to perform illusionary acts any more than any fiction maker need be. The pretense theory has a cousin who might at first sight appear in better health, the view that works of fiction are representations of speech acts. Several theorists have advanced such an account of literature or poetic language or fictive discourse. The composition of a fictional text is the representation, that is to say, depiction, of an illocutionary action, or series of them, in basically the same sense in which a painter depicts a cow or an actor on the stage depicts an act of punching. Bardsley Aesthetics. Wait just a second, please. Okay. A literary work purportedly imitates or reports a series of speech acts which in fact have no other existence. Oman's speech acts see also Bardsley possibility of criticism, Eaton liars, ranters, and dramatic speakers, and Smith margins of discourse. If this is taken as a theory of fiction in general, not just literary fiction, it collapses immediately. Fictional pictures obviously need not represent speech acts. A picture of a unicorn does not represent anyone's asserting that there is a unicorn or anyone's performing any other illocutionary act. It just represents a unicorn. This means that the theory will not help us understand the fictionality of literary fictions, even if it fits the class of literary fictions. Do literary works of fiction represent speech acts? Those with narrators do. Conrad's Lord Jim makes it fictional that Marlowe utters certain words, the words of the text, thereby making various assertions, asking questions, and so on. I favor recognizing narrators in nearly all literary works, however much some of them fade into the background. But the option of regarding some works as lacking narrators is certainly viable, and it may be close to mandatory for works of a literary tradition in which obvious, four-fronted narrators are unknown. So we must allow that there can be works of literary fiction that do not represent speech acts. Even if we disallowed this possibility, the theory would not tell us what makes fictional works of literature fictional, since it fails as an account of fiction in general. What we need to know is what it is to represent anything at all in the appropriate sense. But what a literary fiction represents is discourse or illocutionary acts, is at best merely what makes it literature. It is essential. Okay. It is essential to see that the ills of the theories of fiction as pretended um, and as represented illocutionary actions are not superficial ones that might respond to topical treatment. Tinkering with the notion of pretense or that of a narrator will not help. The theories are wrong to the core. The core of both of them is the idea that fiction is parasitic on serious discourse, that fictional uses of language, pictures, or anything else are to be understood in terms of their use in making assertions, asking questions, issuing orders, or engaging in other activities characteristic of non-fictional language. These serious uses are primary, it is thought, and fictional uses are based on or derived from them in one way or another. What is crucial, according to the core of the theories, is that fiction necessarily involves the use of tools designed primarily for serious discourse, and that it is their primary serious function that makes possible their use in fiction. We have seen that works of fiction, pictorial and sculptural ones at least, are not things of sorts which need have any serious uses. Indeed, I see no reason to suppose that there must be any such thing as serious discourse involving language or pictures or anything else, or that anyone must have any conception of such in order for pictures and sculptures to be fictional. The notion of fiction is not parasitic on that of serious discourse. That's important. Discourse. That's important. Why has anyone thought otherwise? Mainly, it seems to me, because of a narrow concentration on literature coupled with the naive assumption that whatever works for literature will work for the other arts as well. Fictional literature may be parasitic on serious discourse. Literature, fictional or otherwise, necessarily involves the use of language, and perhaps nothing counts as language unless it is sometimes used for serious discourse. If so, fictional literature is to be explained partly in terms of serious discourse, but not because it is literature, not because it is fiction. Even this is open to challenge. Consider a society in which there is no serious discourse, but in which people construct works of fiction out of what look like English sentences. Their works are not vehicles of pretended illocutionary actions, nor do they represent illocutionary actions. Like pictures and sculptures, they have no narrators. Shall we say that they are composed of language, and that they are works of literature? If so, we will have to grant that even the notion of literary fiction is independent of that of serious discourse. Fiction fiction making as an illocutionary action. Let us consider one final way in which speech act theory has been thought to eliminate the nature of fiction. Fiction making is sometimes said to be not one of the standard varieties of illocutionary actions that constitute serious discourse, nor an action of pretending to perform such illocutionary actions or one of representing them, but rather a special, sui generis sort of illocutionary action itself. Works of fiction are thought of as essentially vehicles of the illocutionary action of fiction making. Walter Staff works in worlds, see also Gale, fictive use of language, Eaton Liars, warranters, and dramatic speakers, and Curie, what is fiction? It is incumbent on propounders of this view to spell out what kind of illocutionary act fiction making is, of course. But they face a difficulty more serious than this, one infecting the very idea that fiction making is an illocutionary action and that works of fiction are essentially vehicles of such an action. Speech act theories attempt to understand language fundamentally in terms of actions that speakers perform rather than properties of words or sentences. Linguistic expressions are regarded as essentially vehicles of speakers' actions. Their salient properties, such as their having certain meanings, are explained in terms of their roles in such actions. If the action of fiction making is to be regarded fruitfully as an illocutionary action, as analogous to asserting, questioning, and promising, it must be similarly fundamental. Works of fiction must be understood primarily as vehicles of acts of fiction making, just as sentences are vehicles of acts and of asserting, questioning, and promising. Although we can describe sentences as assertions, the notion of assertion applies primarily to human actions. No doubt this is because it is the actions, not the sentences, that are fundamental. Assertive sentences are important as means whereby people assert. Sentences are assertions in a merely derivative or parasitic sense. A sentence is an assertion if it is a sentence of a kind people ordinarily or typically or normally use to make assertions. Likewise, it is argued, fictionally representing is fundamentally a human action, something people do. Works and Worlds by Walter Stoff. They do it by producing texts or pictures or other artifacts. Hence, we can, if we like, speak in a derivative sense of texts or pictures as fictional representations. But it is the action that is primarily an action that can be classified along with asserting, promising, and requesting as an illocutionary action in its own right. This analogy fails dramatically. The action of fiction making does not have a place in the institution of fiction similar to that which illocutionary actions have in ordinary conversation. Consider a naturally occurring inscription of an assertive sentence, cracks in a rock, for example, which by pure coincidence spell out Mount Merapi is erupting, and suppose we know for sure, somehow, that the cracks were formed naturally, that nobody inscribed or used them to assert anything. This inscription will not serve anything like the purposes vehicles of people's assertions typically serve. It will not convince us that Mount Merapi is erupting, or that there is reason to believe it is, or that someone thinks it is or wants us to think so. Ordinarily, we are interested in vehicles of a person's assertions precisely because they are just that. An assertive inscription or utterance gets its importance from the fact that someone asserted something in producing it. Our ultimate interest may be in the truth of what is said, but if the words convince us of these truths, they do so, typically, because we take the speaker to have uttered them assertively. Likewise for other illocutionary actions. The action of promising, requesting, apologizing, or threatening is crucial. Sentences are important as vehicles of such actions. A naturally occurring inscription of a sentence of a kind normally used to promise or request or apologize or threaten would be no more than a curiosity.